coming, they said, take me too. So I brought one anyway, Nancy came. And it was a great joy to hear this presentation on the EEG and see how far it has advanced and the development of the measure of coherence. Because we have here in the audience Jean-Paul Banquet. Dr. Banquet was the first one to discover this, that the brain waves during meditation were very synchronous and orderly. And this was in 1973. And Marshy was always very interested in hearing all about any new research. So one time, this guy, Banquet, was coming to Salisbury in Switzerland where we were, and we were all sitting listening to what he was talking, and he's very technical and objective in his presentations. And Marshy sitting, you know, Marshy would often kind of have a pad of paper, and he kind of doodling and making notes while someone's talking. And Dr. Banquet started explaining how the brain waves from the left and the right begin to line up and be synchronous with each other, and from the back and from the front. And suddenly Marshy sort of paid attention, synchrony. It's like, it sounded like something, he knew that it was something very basic. And then there was a physicist there, Dr. Larry Domesh, a quantum field theorist, and he started explaining that, yes, synchrony is very fundamental to natural law. That when you go to the basis of natural law, the quantum mechanical level of natural law, that it's all about synchrony. And so, so this big discussion was made, and as Dr. Roseray said, there was a physicist there, Paul Levine, who had been using coherence measures in astronomy, and he applied that to the EEG. It was very leading edge at that time. And it was so amazing to see these brainwave displays where they show exactly what's happening at the moment, and the synchrony and the coherence at the very moment that it's happening. Because back in 1973-74, it took all night for the computer to compute one little screen between just two pairs of parts of the brain for one person. And now we sit and we watch many areas of the brain simultaneously in real time. And one funny story was that Margie took a tour of England, talking about the scientific research at different universities, and we went to Oxford and Cambridge, and we were in London, and I was with Dr. Banquet going into a laboratory of an EEG researcher there, and he was challenging that we could tell the difference between the brain waves during meditation and the brain waves when a person's sort of on the junction point before you begin to start to fall asleep. Because the EEG during TM is like that. You settle down, it's kind of like falling asleep, except that you fall awake. You begin to descend into quieter and quieter levels, but instead of going into no consciousness, you go into pure consciousness, depending on your physiology. If you're tired, you will go to sleep. So anyway, Dr. Peter Fenwick had these brainwave patterns of this is during TM. He didn't say which was which. One he said was TM, and one was during a person just on that junction point. And he challenged Dr. Banquet to say which one was TM, which one was meditation. And I was really worried. I couldn't really tell. It looked very similar to me. And Dr. Banquet looks at it and he says, "Oh, that one." And he was right. So I was relieved. But now I'm relieved that the computers can tell these very subtle shifts in the difference of the brain waves when we begin to meditate. And Dr. Anna-Marie Roseray was one of the ones who showed that not only the coherence increases, but also the amplitude, the size of the EEG. It becomes very dominant in the EEG spectrum, which you saw in those mountain peaks, that the mountain peaks are suddenly in that alpha frequency during meditation. Anyway, so one of the things that we found that EEG coherence is related to is reduced anxiety. When you're in that very relaxed state, in that very calm state, people who have a lot of coherence tend to be not anxious. The people who aren't anxious tend not to have that coherence. So what I want to talk about in my talk, we can start it, is the effects of transcendental meditation on stress and the effects of reducing stress on health. This is the right one. And this is a picture of Charak, who wrote the classic Ayurveda text. One of Charaka's disciples asked him, what is the one thing that everybody could do of whatever their different constitutional types, whatever kind of person they were, that would be good for their health? What's one thing that would be good for everybody's health? And he said, take a walk in the morning sunlight. That would be good for everybody. So, and interestingly, it's recently been discovered that basic DNA expression processes have a biological rhythm. And so our whole bionome, our microbiome, and our DNA and the whole expression has this rhythm. And so anyway, taking a walk in the morning sun, you can think, your whole system is being reset, especially if you've been jet lagged. Okay, so what is stress? I'm going to talk about the effects of TM and meditation, transcendental meditation, on reducing stress. And stress was first scientifically described by Walter B. Cannon, who was a professor at Harvard in about 1915. And he described a syndrome of reactions that happen whenever we're challenged, that we have to either fight or fly. And we know all of these. It's faster breathing, heart rate increasing, blood pressure goes up, muscle tension increases, the palms become sweaty. And transcendental meditation has just the opposite effects. So what is the function of fight or flight? It's to be successful if we have to fight, focuses our attention, heightens our senses, raises our blood pressure and heart rate to provide all the nutrients to the muscles. So it's a good thing if you're a soccer player or you call it here football player and you want to win, that whole reaction is good. If you want to run away, if you need to fly, then you want that fight or flight reflex is going to allow you to survive. So it's something that's evolved through our evolutionary history, which has allowed us to survive. So if it mobilizes stress and for dynamic activity, then what's the problem? The problem is chronic stress. And in modern life, we have all kinds of stresses all the time. It's not a tiger that we have to run away with. It's our computer crashing, or it's our boss, not paying attention to us, or whatever. And that chronic stress creates problems in the physiology. This chart shows the stress reaction, various stress hormones that go through various stages. That in stage 1, when the person is stressed, cortisol, for example, rises up, and that mobilizes the body for activity. But if you keep stressing the person over and over again, coming out this way, eventually the system won't respond anymore. It becomes fatigued. So the ideal situation would be one where we have all of the adaptive reserves available. We have the cortisol and all of the different responses and energy available if we have to meet a challenge, but then quickly recover afterwards and not be carrying around stress with us all the time. That's what wears down the body. And that's where meditation is really, really a very powerful tool for resetting that stress response back to a very quiet baseline, 20 minutes twice a day, which is the schedule. So in Europe and in France, stress is a big problem. It's the second most common work-related problem. For example, France persistently has more stressful working conditions than its European neighbors. These are according to various surveys here. According to ANACT, 41% of workers in France are affected by stress. So this is not just an abstract concept. France is a great place. It has the best food. It has the best artists. It has the most beautiful country, obviously the most beautiful language, and the most beautiful women. But stress is messing up the whole show. So we just need a tool to help reduce the stress. So I'm going to talk about the scientific research on TM. There have been 675 studies published in from 250 universities and research institutions in 30 countries, and published in over 20 peer-reviewed journals. And we'll just look at a summary of some of the highlights on those. So how does TM reduce stress? This is our familiar experience. And then for those who are meditators, we get to reset our physiology, recharge our brain by just sinking into this very quiet, peaceful state. And whereas we saw that the stress response increases breath rate and heart rate and all of those things, research on TM has shown that it decreases respiratory rate, heart rate, blood pressure, decreased muscle tension, drier palms. It's in the opposite direction. The whole physiology of TM is in the opposite direction of what Cannon described as the fight or flight reflex. And reduction of stress. Stress has been shown to be a risk factor for almost all diseases, heart disease. We expect that if you can reduce stress, you could reduce medical care utilization, medical care costs, pushing the wrong button. It should improve the quality of life and increase longevity. After all, how long we live is really a measure of how well we've dealt with the stress of our lives. Aging is the big stress experiment that life imposes on us. And so to see how well we survive it, it really helps to have a tool to reduce stress. So, for example, here's a study on cortisol. Cortisol is a major stress hormone. And we have the control condition here. These control subjects are people who are interested in learning TM. And we're going in time this way. So the first 20 minutes is baseline. They're just sitting with their eyes closed. During the experimental period, the people who know transcendental meditation are meditating, and the control subjects are continuing to sit with their eyes closed. You can see that with the control subjects, the cortisol levels remain pretty much what they were before, maybe popping up a little afterwards. The long-term meditators, they decrease. It decreases, cortisol decreases about 30% during that 20-minute period. The new meditators, these are the control subjects, then learn to meditate, and then they were remeasured. And you see that they begin also during meditation to show a significant reduction in the cortisol levels. It's also been found that meditators have lower cortisol levels throughout the cycle of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. So this is showing the TM group and then the matched control group. During waking hours, the cortisol levels are lower. During sleep, it's lower than the controls. And this is the average of the whole day. And that's very important for insomnia. One of the things that can cause insomnia would be having elevated cortisol levels during the night. So you're still fighting the tigers of your life during your sleep. This is a meta-analysis of 32 studies that showed that looking at all the research that had been done on the physiology of meditation compared to what happens if you were just sitting with your eyes closed. So if you saw two persons sitting on a bench, and one was practicing transcendental meditation, the other was just sitting with their eyes closed, you probably wouldn't be able to tell any difference between them. They're just sitting there with their eyes closed. But if you look at their physiology, you see the ones that are meditating show greater reductions in cortisol than the ones just resting, greater reductions in breathing rate, and greater increases in basal skin conductance, which is the hands drying out. Now, meditation is not a single state of physiology. It's not like it's only one thing. It's actually a cycle. And if you learn transcendental meditation, you'll learn what that cycle is. There's an inward and an outward stroke. So that meta-analysis was just on the average effect of meditating on your physiology. But within that, there are very deep periods of transcendence which are associated with the mind becoming completely still and the brain becoming completely coherent. It's just a very restful alertness state. And what we see is, this is respiratory rate, respiration, this is the breath rate here. The time scale is 1 minute, so the person's breathing about 12 breaths per minute. We had the person punch a button after they had this transcending experience. During it, the person is completely absorbed within into their own unbounded awareness, and they're not thinking about pushing buttons or anything. But afterwards, they can signal us, oh yes, I just had that experience of transcending. So we looked at the record, what happened right before they pushed the button telling us that they were transcending. The breath stopped for, up to maybe 40 seconds, very consistently. So then we had a marker of what this deepest level of meditation was like, and we were interested in looking at what the brain was like. I say we, this is done by all sorts of different people, not me necessarily. This is looking at the EEG coherence in many different parts of the brain. Each of these lines represents a different part of the brain, between two different parts of the brain. And during the transcending period, during the respiratory suspension, you can see that it all pops up. It's like we're measuring coherence here. Suddenly coherence increases, and it's not just in the alpha frequency, but it's across all frequencies. And I think as Dr. Banquet was explaining to you, the different EEG frequencies have different functional significance in processing information and everything. The alpha, the slow alpha that you see during TM has the function of organizing the whole brain. It's been shown to be important for very fine perceptual motor performance, for memory, for creativity. But the other frequencies are important too, for focusing. And what we see in this slide is that across all the frequencies, it's a very totally coherent state across all brain areas and across all EEG frequencies that is associated with this transcendental state. So we have objective measures now that there is a fourth major state of consciousness, as the Vedic literature, the Ayurvedic literature of India talks about, which is that this pure consciousness. It's different from waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And this slide shows that it's not only during meditation that your respiratory rate and all of these physiological measures, plasma lactate and heart rate, decrease. It's also outside of meditation. So this is looking at meditators compared to controls just while the meditators are resting, compared with just the control subjects who don't meditate. And what you see is that they have a lower resting level. So we're beginning to see this ideal pattern being developed that after meditating, and this develops over time, the person develops a state where they're calmer when they're not being stressed, and they're not carrying the stress around with them. They're not ruminating so much. And that's what's shown in this slide. That there's a lower baseline level. And then from that level where you've conserved your energy, if there comes a time that you need to respond, you need to make that goal on the football field, that energy is there for having that spurt of energy, because it hasn't been wasted, on just sort of worrying all the time. Maharishi says there's two times when you don't need to worry. Number one, when you can do something about it. Because you don't need to worry, you can do something about it. The other time you don't need to worry is when you can't do something about it. Why worry? You can't do anything about it. So, but sometimes it's hard to maintain that kind of wise perspective. Your physiology reacts automatically, and it becomes habituated to react automatically in a more calm, efficient way when you practice meditation regularly. This is the first study that I ever did on meditation, 1970 when I learned, and I was teaching experimental psychology at the University of Texas in El Paso, and I noticed the meditators were calmer. I had the idea that what meditation does is it deconditions your conditioned reactions. For example, if you're a person who has PTSD, you have all of this conditioned reactions to the kind of thoughts and experiences
that you had during the war, and they evoke that. So you hear a siren or you hear a loud bang, and suddenly you hold a huge response like that. So anyway, I got into measuring skin resistance response, and this was looking at actually how many small responses a person makes if they're just sitting quietly with their eyes closed. I found, and there was a literature showing that if you just put the electrodes on the palms of the hands and you're measuring how much a little sweat response, you turn the sensitivity of the machine way up, you measure these little responses like this, instabilities that are going on in our nervous system, even then there's nothing happening, you're just sitting with your eyes closed. And I found that the meditators showed much fewer of those. It was much more stable. You could count the number of these little responses of a certain size and quantify. This was before and during and after sitting resting, and this was before, during, and after practicing TM. You can see that the overall level, even with their eyes closed, of these spontaneous stress responses is less, and during meditation it goes down even more. So the previous slide I showed you was a meta-analysis of 32 studies that showed that looking at all the research that has been done on spontaneous skin resistance responses, that the meditators show a much lower level than the control subjects. And I also found that the meditators recover faster from stress. So this is looking at the amplitude of the stress response and to a loud noise, which is presented several times, up to 45 times. And as you present the thing, each time the person responds less. You get used to it. It doesn't mean anything. There's no reason to be responding to this. It's just a loud noise that this annoying doctor is making me listen to. You know, the adaptive thing would be to take off the thing and say, I'm not going to be in this stupid experiment, but fortunately, my subjects maybe they thought that, but they didn't leave. So I was able to show that the meditators recovered faster than the non-meditators continued to respond. And it was related to the background, to how many spontaneous skin resistance responses they had. Just to mean that if you're worrying about things and you're stressed out and something happens, you respond to it more than you would if you were calm, if you had a good night's sleep, if you were relaxed. So TM puts you more often into that space where you're feeling calmer. If something happens, you can deal with it. You're not going to get all bent out of shape by it. This is a study which demonstrates that TM does increase dynamic activity. This was a longitudinal study. And looking at driving speed on a simulator, and the study was looking at heart rate and how much the heart rate was changing. And what you see is that the meditators, which are the blue line, after they've been meditating several months, they actually were driving faster. The control groups were basically driving at about 114.5 miles per hour. And the meditators went from driving 114 miles per hour to 119 miles an hour. So there's more dynamic activity. It's not like meditation is going to make you, just like a zombie, just the opposite. And yet, while they were driving faster, their heart rate decreased from what it was doing when they were driving slower. So they were cool. They were like cool dudes. And, all of the heroes, like the cowboy heroes, or the samurai heroes, they're surrounded by the opponents, and they're threatening the other guys are yelling at them, and they remain very cool. And then when the moment comes, Toshiro Mifune pulls out his sword, he dispatches the whole group up, and then he walks away. And so that's TM actually was originally given to the warrior class in India because it was preparation for dynamic activity. Maharishi gives the analogy, if you want the arrow to go forward, you pull it back on the bow. It may seem counterintuitive. If you want to be dynamic in the football game, you're going to meditate. You're going to sit and close your eyes. Does this make sense? It's like pulling the arrow back. It gains that energy, and then you let go. And so that's what the study shows. This was a study I did looking at reaction to pain and looking at the pain matrix, the different parts of the brain. And these are typical subjects, different subjects. This is looking at different parts of the brain, left, center, and right, using functional magnetic resonance imaging. And you see where it lights up here, this is the reaction to pain before these subjects learned to meditate. These were people who were interested in learning. The pain was, we had them put their finger in some hot water. The hot water was not so hot that if you felt it under the tap, you would feel it was threatening or anything. But if you leave your finger in it for 30 seconds, it really hurts. And so, and I had to do that to convince the Human Subjects Protection Committee that they should let us do the experiment. So I went and said, this doesn't hurt at all. It's okay. My finger was red the whole day, but it was no damage. But anyway, after these people had been meditating 5 months, you see the reaction is much less. And there's much less distress. They're feeling the pain. They certainly feel it, at least as sensitively as before. When you meditate, you reduce your stress. You actually enjoy the world more. You hear music more clearly. You know, everything is more beautiful. When we're stressed out and tired, then it's very foggy. The whole thing is foggy. So they're feeling it, but their brain is not being distressed by it. And this is the meta-analysis on blood pressure, on all of the high-quality studies on blood pressure, 107 studies, 17 randomized controlled trials, 960 subjects. And you can see that during TM, systolic blood pressure decreases by about 5 millimeters per mercury. And these other relaxation techniques of muscle relaxation, stress management, biofeedback, and combined treatment, they did not have significant effects on systolic blood pressure. So this has been shown over and over again in blood pressure studies on TM, that it's highly effective in reducing blood pressure. And the American Heart Association has recommended that, that TM may be considered for clinical practice to lower blood pressure. This is a recommendation given to physicians throughout the United States that when you have blood pressure patients, which is about half the population of the United States, that you can recommend they practice TM. And they found that they could not recommend other meditation techniques at that time, in particular mindfulness-based stress reduction, because the evidence was not that clear. The best study that was done on it didn't show any effect at all. And then there's been a number of studies on the effects of transcendental meditation on functionality in heart patients. So these are heart patients with congestive heart failure. These are people whose heart does not supply enough blood to do things. And the test was how far they could walk. These are elderly people with heart conditions. And this was an improvement, a significant improvement in how far they could walk in a 6-minute period compared with the health education control, which was a random assignment experiment. So you had the TMers and you had the people who were randomly assigned to do another active thing, which should do something, health education. But actually it improved the functionality of the meditators. And the similar thing has been found with people with angina. Angina is pain to the heart due to insufficient blood supply or insufficient oxygen to the heart. And TM increased how long they could exercise, the workload that they could exercise on a standard test, and it decreased, this decrease on ST depression onset is an indication that there's more blood supply, sufficient blood supply to the heart in the patients who had angina who are practicing TM. So it actually can repair, very advanced kind of damage to the physiology, just as deep rest. And how does that happen? That rest is the prescription that doctors always give, no matter what your condition is. Get some rest. If you break something, you break an arm or something specific, they put it in a cast. Why? That makes your arm rest. And when in that rest condition, it repairs itself. So TM produces a very unique kind of rest, this wakefulness, this restful alertness in which the whole physiology is very coherent. All the different parts are organized and communicating with each other. And in that state of restful, high communication, the body repairs itself much more effectively. And this is risk of arterial sclerosis. The arteries become unblocked, is basically what this is showing. And this is a study on heart attacks, strokes, and death. It was a randomized study of heart patients, and the measure was how many of the groups, how many heart attacks, how many strokes, how many died. These were elder patients at the beginning of the study. It followed them up to 10 years, on average over 5 years. And it was found that looking at all of the subjects together, not just the ones who were regular in meditation, but all of them, and some meditated, say, half the time, some maybe a quarter of the time, some meditated twice a day, which was the recommendation. Looking at all of them, there was a 48% lower risk of heart attacks, strokes, and death in the TM group than in the control group who got health education as their procedure. And this graph shows the relationship between how regular the people meditated, once 0, not at all, once a day, twice a day, which is a recommendation, and how much was the reduction in the risk. It was 74% reduction in risk for the people who were regularly meditating. So if you want to learn to meditate, don't be in the control group and be regular. There's a comedian at our university, and he says, I have an idea. He wanted the names of all the people in the control group on this study. Of course, we're never going to give out anybody's name like that. But I said, well, Mark, why do you want the names? He said, because he wants to get them into a class action lawsuit against the researchers for putting them in the control group where they had 48% more heart attacks, strokes, and death than the ones that got TM. I said, well, yeah, it's random assignment and all that, but it was a good kind of interesting perspective. And now I refer to my non-meditating relatives and friends as the control group. And anyway, there's studies showing the strengthening of the immune system, studies with people with HIV, improvement in general health, and with HIV functional assessment. So specifically helping to cure that problem. And so stress in the workplace. People in France feel stressed when they feel they're imbalanced between what they're asked to do and the resources available for them. And 30% of French employees don't feel appreciated at work compared to the European mean of 22%. So TM there have been a number of studies in business and industry which address this problem. And this one shows less tension on the job, improved interpersonal relationships on the job, increased satisfaction with one's professional and personal life, increased sleep quality in executives and workers. Now, alcohol and drug abuse problem in France as indicators of stress. France has the highest consumption of alcohol and tranquilizers, according to the 3rd European Union Quality of Life Survey. And drug use is spreading in France. Alcohol, tobacco, psychotropic drugs, all of these things, cannabis, cocaine, heroin, are used to focus on work. Maybe not the best way to focus on work, maybe to escape, to sleep well at night, and to boost performance, according to another survey. So here's a meta-analysis on 97 studies which looked at all the different kinds of techniques for dealing with alcohol abuse, and TM had a much higher effect, larger effect size. If you know statistics, you know 0.6 is a strong, moderately strong effect, and it was significantly bigger. The effect of TM, looking at all these studies, was better than these other ways of dealing with alcohol use: relaxation, peer influence, drug DUI programs, driving under the influence. These are drivers who've been caught driving while they're drunk, and preventative education doesn't seem to. You're telling people, you know, you shouldn't drink and it has these terrible effects. Education doesn't seem to do much. And this is the effect of alcohol use among serious users. So it's not, the casual users, TM has a lower effect than on the serious users. So it really reduces the extremes. And you see this in this next study. This is a study of people who were in treatment for their alcohol problem. They call it the alcohol use disorder. And this is looking at return to drinking, and this is looking at heavy drinking. This was after 90 days after they were released from the facility. And the control group got all of the things that the facility usually has, all kinds of counseling, detox programs. The TM group also had that, but in addition they had TM. And so there was, after they'd been released for 3 or 4 months, it was found that the people who started TM had less return to drinking at all, and none of them had returned to heavy drinking. And we'll get into an explanation for that. Similar effects have been found for drug use. You know, this is the cocaine, the marijuana, and so forth. And also cigarette use. People tend to stop smoking cigarettes. So an interesting thing is that the dynamics of how TM changes drug use, whether it's alcohol, heroin, smoking cigarettes, is very different from the way other kinds of programs change it. So in other programs, what we see in this graph over here, this is other programs, and this is the relapse rate over time. So 100% means everybody quit. So this is the beginning of the program, and this is looking out over a year, up to 12 months here. So at the beginning of the program, you go to a cigarette, I want to stop smoking, you go to a program, everybody's enthusiastic, okay, I'm throwing away my cigarettes, everybody stops. Everybody stops drinking, okay, I'm going to stop drugs. After a year, there's only about 20 to 30% are still abstinent, are still not drinking, not smoking, and so forth. So everybody's fallen off the wagon, or 70% of the people have fallen off the wagon. With TM, you have a quite different pattern. When you learn transcendental meditation, you don't have to stop smoking to learn TM. You don't have to stop drinking. But what happens is, if you've been meditating a long time, those things begin to stop. And why is that? Because you become more sensitive to what these substances are doing to your physiology. That's one thing. And you're feeling better. And so taking drugs, or trying to self-medicate to experience a more ideal state. So if we're feeling anxious, we take something to calm us down. We're feeling low and depressed, we take something to pick us up. So during meditation, if that balances you out, the anxiety goes down or the depression goes away, then the motivation to reach for the drug, to reach for the cigarette, to reach for the upper and downer is just not there. And that's what people report. Okay, teacher burnout. TM reduces anxiety. It has a larger effect on reducing anxiety than on mindfulness in a very large meta-analysis. This is showing reduced anxiety in prisoners. And traumatic stress, which is feeling symptoms of stress all the time. This is a very recent study showing the reduction in PTSD symptoms during TM compared with exposure therapy, which is the main therapy used for PTSD, where you have them relive the experience over and over until they stop responding to it. And TM was more effective than the standard treatment. The other control group was just health education. Okay, these are 5 different studies on TM looking at the effect size of reducing PTSD symptoms compared with 5 studies on mindfulness, which has about half the effect of TM. Now, health insurance statistics. This study shows the hospitalization rates of a group of 2,000 meditators over a 5-year period. And what you see here is that the meditator group, which is the blue bars, have lower rates of hospitalization across all disease categories. It's not like it's for one thing, where you get that deep rest, that the whole body heals itself, whatever the problem. And when you look at it by age, you see that the difference between the meditator group and the control group is even greater for the older subjects, for both hospitalization and doctor visits. So it's a great anti-aging thing. You know, with age, your hospitalization rates go up. Everybody goes up. And, but the difference between the meditators and their age-compared peers is much greater. It's more like in the 70% range. And this is another study that used some Ayurvedic products along with just meditation. And you see even greater reductions here compared to the controls. And again, you see this age-related difference on hospitalization. With other Ayurvedic procedures, they were 88% lower. There were 2 different kinds of control groups here. And so how regular is this? This was looking at 11 years of data, and you see the meditator group compared with the normative data of 600,000 in this health insurance study. And very consistently, it's not just, it was lucky you found 1 year that meditators had better health insurance statistics. It was every year, 74%, like that 74% that you saw with heart disease with that randomized control study. And this is looking at outpatient visits, consistently lower. And this is medical care costs, on average 63% level lower over all those years. And this is a longitudinal study of, you might say, well, maybe the meditators were healthier before they learned to meditate. But here's a graph showing the meditators, they learn to meditate, and their health care costs start decreasing, about 14% per year. The control group is going up, like the meditators, and they continue to go up. And this is elderly patients, the same pattern. The meditator group is once they start meditating, their health insurance cost expenditures decrease. And it's anti-aging, all these different variables that show that TM has the opposite effect of what aging does. And this is a study on biological age, that people had been meditating 5 years, were 12 years younger in their biological age. So when I took the test, I was 40 years at the time. This is years ago. And they said, oh, you're 28 on your biological age. So that was good news. And reduced mortality. This is sort of the ultimate stress test. TM has been shown to reduce, these long-term studies have shown to reduce the death rate for cardiovascular disease and cancer. So that's it. So thank you very much.